Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Digital Nomad World weekly series. I'm Becky, and I'll be your host. And today I'm bringing back the original host of Digital Nomad World, my colleague with Digital Nomad World, Becca. Becca, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's funny to
Oh,
be on this side.
yes, thank you for joining us again. I've actually had you on a couple of times. I know we had an interview with your colleagues with Global Convoy as well, which we're going to link at the bottom of this episode.
Yeah, we did. It was a little while ago, so it's good to be back on and good to be talking about some other things.
Yes, and we're going to actually talk about something. We have written some articles. We've had some articles on our website about traveling sustainably, but we've never talked about it in the podcast. So I think it's such an important topic, and we would love to share more with you today about our ideas because it's becoming so important, right, Becca?
For sure, yeah. And I think digital nomads are probably one of the biggest groups of people that can have the most positive impact, I think. So, yeah, it's good to chat about what people can be doing to help and things and habits that we can change.
Yeah. Do you mind starting by sharing with us your history with traveling sustainably? Have you ever worked in the industry? How did you first start traveling? And I don't know if you had any products with you that you found or, things that have lasted over the years that you haven't had to replace, things like that.
Yeah, for sure. So, I guess I went on my first backpacking trip, my gap year kind of thing, in my early 20s in 2016. And I guess one of the first products I was introduced to is a bottle called Water to Go. This was more for the having the ability to be able to drink from any source of water. And at the time, my travel was all focused on budget, so that was great when I was going to be at airports and water's so expensive. But the founder, Dave, he used to work in the textiles industry, and he saw how much plastic was being wasted from water bottles from travel because he would used to maybe he would go to India to buy fabrics and he was always provided plastic bottled water. And I think it's kind of interesting, like that small, like that one product, I guess, was like my introduction to maybe thinking a bit more sustainably when we travel. Um, on that particular trip, we drove around the world. So I had this bottle for a year and if I'd bought a plastic bottle every day, say like a 2 liter bottle, that would have been over 300 bottles. Just, the amount of plastic produced and the cost is kind of insane. So I guess that's kind of where I first started to become kind of aware of like what people were doing and how, as like travelers and adventurers, we can think a bit more about what our impact is to the places that we're going. Um, and since then, well, I mean, for those of you that know my background, the community manager for Digital Nomad World. I've been pretty much on the road since 2016, so almost 10 years now. I've been moving around. And last year, I started working with a sustainable bookings website. So kind of like a booking.com type thing. It's called Explorio, but they offset all your carbon emissions. And this kind of introduced me again to a new thing within the industry, because I've spent many years working in travel and tourism, about how we can offset our emissions. So, kind of thinking a bit more about how we travel. Um, there's small things like I didn't realize I've always stayed in hostels and kind of community places because I enjoy that way of travel. And I saw a statistic that said that it's 75% less carbon emissions are produced by staying in a hostel compared to a hotel.
Wow.
Um, and I think that goes quite well with digital nomad communities, with co-livings and things like that. Like you may already be doing things that you don't realize are actually a bit more sustainable than perhaps your average traveler.
Yeah, I had not heard that statistic before. That is incredible. We don't realize, yeah, just like you said. And also, I know co-livings seem to be on the rise. as well. I think in part because of
Hmm.
cost, because maybe people really wanting to share and meet new people in a really cozy kind of way. But we are also doing our part for the planet, I think, in that way.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's lots of different things that people can do to help reduce their emissions. I think it's just about perhaps knowing what options are out there and obviously being presented with options too. Like until I knew that statistic, I would have just kind of assumed that staying in a hotel probably used the same amount of energy or produced the same amount of emissions as staying in a hostel or a co-living. But unless we talk about these things, I guess we don't really know.
Yeah, for sure. I actually, to go back to your idea of the plastic and how much we're wasting by drinking those out of those water bottles, are you currently traveling with a plastic reusable bottle, or what kind of material is your water bottle?
So I usually travel with a few because I
Okay.
also have like a thermos, right? So I don't have to use paper cups. So I use water to go. Mostly because I know I can drink from anywhere. So if I'm in a city, airport, out in nature, it gets rid of 99% of all diseases and metals. So that's my like main one I carry around. But then I also have like an Nalgene, like a plastic reusable bottle that when I know I'm in accommodation or somewhere that has tap water I can drink, then I'll fill that up. And then yeah, I have my tiny like thermos thing if I want a coffee, so I don't have to use paper cups everywhere I go.
That's really the first step, right? It's like just getting your own bottle. The reason I was asking you is I read a really alarming statistic, which I am not going to be able to say word for word, but it was a New York Times article, which I'm actually going to post at the bottom of this YouTube video and on Spotify. And it was saying that they are finding more and more plastic particles in our brains. And,
Yeah.
these days we're not even shocked anymore by so many headlines, but that one drew me in, and I read this whole long article about it. So these little tiny particles of the plastics. So if you have a plastic bottle and it gets heated up in some way, there's particles that are coming apart and you're kind of absorbing them slowly over time. And it's so I'm thinking about getting a glass bottle, but I find
Mhm.
large glass bottles to be easy to break, but also sometimes they seem to fall out of my backpack pretty easily. So I'm trying to find the best product I can, but I'm wanting to switch more to glass now after reading that article.
Yeah, that's interesting. I did actually see that article and I was quite surprised by it. But perhaps something to consider. So water to go. I know I'm really going on about them, but I've been using their bottles for years. They have just started producing. So the plastic that their bottles are made from is made from sugar cane. So they're trying to produce a natural plastic. So don't quote me on the full process because I don't fully know, but from what I understand, when sugar cane is crushed, and then it's left to ferment, it creates like an ethanol, and then they can use that to make plastic. And then they also use the pulp to make the structure. So maybe there's even alternative materials out there that are now being used that are perhaps, I mean, you still don't want those particles in you, but maybe if they're a bit more natural, it's not quite as bad. I don't know.
Yeah, I was actually grateful for that article because it shocked me into wanting to take action rather than continuing to put it off because I was using a little
Yeah.
plastic bottle more recently because I've lost my water bottle again. I know this happens to so many travelers on the road. It's hard to get those really nice, like big brand quality water bottles sometimes when you're in the middle of like a remote wilderness somewhere. So you just find a plastic bottle, but we really need to, I think it's high time we start paying more attention to, where exactly, for example, does our clothing come from that we're buying? How is it made? And, what are the materials these things are made of as well?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's something that's, I don't know, I guess maybe if people don't talk about it, then you don't necessarily, it doesn't come up in conversation. You almost need something like that article to kind of kick you into gear and make you think a bit more about it.
Now you mentioned water to go. How about clothing? Do you have a favorite clothing brand that you go to for sustainable clothing as you travel?
Um, that's a good question. If I'm honest, I tend to avoid buying new. I try to buy secondhand. But there are quite a few brands out there that are trying to, I mean, maybe if their materials aren't necessarily, maybe they're still using plastics, they are trying to put money back into um, the planet. There's a few brands. I mean, in the UK, there's an outdoor brand called Alpkit that offer repair services. They also buy back clothing, so you can buy secondhand from them. Um, I believe companies like Patagonia and Cotopaxi, like the big outdoor brands, I think they all work with a charity called 1% for the Planet, where they have to put, or an organization, I'm not sure if it's charity, but you put, the idea is that your business puts 1% of your profit or your annual profit to good causes. Yeah, I don't know. I honestly buy secondhand and I try to avoid buying unless I really need something.
Yes, that would be the first thing to do because there's so many secondhand clothing stores out there these days. But yeah, Patagonia, I really love because I know they'll repair things that break or rip, so things last so much longer. And I've had one Patagonia jacket now for 9 years, I think it is, and it's
That's
been with
great.
me through so many things. Um, and this, okay, I'm going to say a brand which people may disagree with, but I found the clothing for the price to last quite a while. And that's Uniqlo, which is actually around the world now, but it comes from
Mhm.
Japan. I am sure there are practices we do not know about that are, they're using that may not be in line with the sustainable ethos. But I think that I've just found that the clothes for how little I pay, and I try not to rebuy unless I really need it again. It's a really good price point for those people that sometimes might see a price from Patagonia and say, oh, I
Yeah.
can't do it. But I found Uniqlo to be very affordable, but also very practical clothing.
Yeah, that's a good tip because I think, I mean, luggage is also something to consider as well. Like when we're flying, how much luggage we're taking and the impact that that has. But you have to obviously weigh it up with what's the cost of rebuying it for both financially and environmentally. So, yeah.
I've also read about Europe in particular, but also big parts of Asia. They're really trying to connect the world better again by trains. For a long time, EasyJet, Ryanair's of the world, that became a focus for people to travel. But I know Europe and Asia are trying to get much more connected, so you don't want to take and or have to take so many flights.
Yeah, I think it's becoming quite a popular way to travel, particularly for those who are eco kind of conscious. It's so much more sustainable to travel by train than flying. I think the huge barrier right now is probably cost. I know particularly in the UK, it's trains are very expensive and it's sometimes cheaper, unfortunately, to fly out of the UK to fly back into another destination than it is to take a train across the country, which is awful. But I think we're starting to see more of a movement towards train travel, especially like you say in Europe. There's lots of incentives. Quite a few countries have done offers. I think a few years ago, Germany, you could buy like a season ticket for €9 or something, for like 3 months to encourage or discourage people to use their cars, which I think was a huge hit. And yeah, I think we're starting to see, I guess it kind of links as well to the way you travel. I think more people are starting to embrace the slow travel, and the idea of not necessarily having to get from A to B in the quickest way, but to actually enjoy the journey and perhaps, you know, if trains are pretty comfortable, right? If you're a digital nomad, you can still work while you're going along. A lot of them have power, Wi-Fi, things like that. So I think we're seeing a movement of people trying to be more sustainable in that type of travel. Um, I think for me, I've always traveled over land, so without kind of realizing it, I know obviously, sorry, using diesel and petrol vehicles isn't always considered sustainable, but if you have a car full of people, that's going to be way more sustainable than everyone taking a flight or traveling separately. And I think it's really important when we travel to think about how we can use public transport, how we can support kind of local businesses in that sense and ride share. I noticed in the article that you wrote for Digital Nomad World about BlaBlaCar, there's so many great things out there that can help. If someone's making the journey anyway, then why not go with them and save another car going?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I am traveling right now. I am in Turkey, and like I'm traveling with a group, and a bunch of us were planning a day trip tomorrow. And at first, it was me and three others, and we wanted to rent a car. But we found, even though we'd have to pay a little bit more, of course, if we do transport, and we won't have the freedom to stop along the way, we are still saving so much on our emissions by just taking one big vehicle. And I think that's something that it's going to be a little less of our own freedom, and it might take a little bit longer. But I think that's kind of the mindset and the mentality, especially as digital nomads. We first of all we have that ability because we have the remote jobs that we have, but also we need to maybe start thinking that's our default mindset instead of a privileged mindset or the quickest, like, let's get on the easy jet flight.
I think that's the thing, like I think the biggest kind of question around sustainability really is convenience over what is right, maybe to do. And I think for many years, I mean, that's where single-use plastics have come in for convenience. I know there's certain industries and certain scenarios where it's kind of necessary, in medical profession, it allows us to have sterile tools, which, it's very different, but if you're in a bar, you don't need a plastic straw. You can use a reusable one or just not have it. And I think I think people just need to think a bit more about the kind of the conveniences that we're used to, and actually are they a necessity? And if they're not, what can we do to kind of reduce our use of these things or to make, you know, it might be a small impact, but just start moving in the right direction of kind of helping and being a bit more aware of um, our impact when we travel.
Yeah. Do you travel with like a shopping bag that you can take everywhere, for example?
Oh yeah, all the time.
I
Yeah.
made a mistake yesterday. I didn't travel with it this time, and I had to get a bag. And I didn't get a plastic one, but I had to get a bag just now from the supermarket. And this is little tiny things that can make a big difference, especially if you're traveling for a
Yeah.
while. Are there any other
Yeah.
things that you travel with like this
Um,
besides to go shopping bags? Don't take the plastic straw.
yeah. Sometimes cutlery. I have a bamboo cutlery set that I take around if I know I'm going to be at the airport or somewhere like that where there's quite often just sort of it's so easy to pick up a plastic fork or plastic knife. And I mean lots of businesses are trying to replace these with wood, which is great, but it's still the production. If everyone, if you just had one in your bag that's always with you, then think how many, if you think about in a year how many times you might use one, how many you could save. And I think it's about like these small things that we can do will have an impact, and there is a bigger picture. I think it's just really hard when you're in the moment to think like, oh, I'll just have this plastic fork. It's only once. Um, but I think if we all just make these changes, I think it's also about being a bit more organized. Just, it's not difficult to keep a cutlery set in your bag. It's not difficult to keep a mug or a cup in there for coffee. Um, So I think it's a bit about training ourselves to remember, like with the shopping bags. Growing up, we never had reusable shopping bags. You go to the supermarket, everything's plastic. But now it's very normal that people take their own bags. So I think we kind of have to train ourselves out of these conveniences.
Absolutely. You're reminding me also of like going to, if you've ever been to some music festivals or like a Burning Man type of village. You read about these villages that are temporary. Now, there is a lot wrong with building a temporary village and doing all of that, all of those things. It produces a lot of trash. But one thing you will find that I wish could be transferred to more parts of our society is that everybody has to bring their own cup. Everybody is bringing their own cutlery and they go around with their cup to the different establishments serving them food, and it's just built in like that. I wish we could go to different, famous brand restaurants and just bring our cup and it was normal instead of, oh, there's a sanitary issue or we don't know what to charge you. I don't know how we get started with like making everybody fall in line with this practice, but I feel like that's what we need to start doing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess over time things will slowly change. I'm not really sure what the EU law is right now, but I don't think plastic straws particularly exist much. They've all been changed to paper. So there are people that can make these changes and kind of, I think as soon as it's kind of made a law or a requirement, then the people follow suit. I guess you have no choice if you go to a bar and you want a straw and there's no straws, right? Um, but it would be good if, people could start thinking a bit more about their impact. And I think something that maybe people don't consider, or like digital nomads or travelers, backpackers, whatever, is actually like when we go somewhere and we use these items, not everywhere has the same recycling infrastructure. And, whilst at home, maybe there's really good systems for reusing things, there isn't always, it isn't the case everywhere. And I think if you are in a position where you can contribute the least to that kind of, if you can have the least impact, then I think that's kind of, yeah, I think it's kind of a responsibility of digital nomads to think about that when they're traveling and try to actively do what they can to have as least impact.
We all need to keep thinking more and more about that. I am curious, speaking of the digital nomad lifestyle, what sustainability skills have you developed that you don't think you would have learned if you had not been a digital nomad?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I don't know. I mean, not necessarily from being a digital nomad, but definitely from traveling. I think seeing other cultures and seeing different places helps you kind of get a better understanding of, like I mentioned, like recycling. Not everywhere has the same systems. I mean, we've both spent time in Bulgaria and Bansko, and they have recycling bins, but I don't know if they actually are emptied individually. And I think just, I guess I've kind of become aware that I should try and consume as least amount of single-use things as I can when I travel because I don't know what their capabilities are of recycling it and for it not damaging their environment. I think that's really important to think about what your impact does from being there. Um, yeah, I don't know. I guess, yeah, maybe just, yeah, thinking more about, it's a privilege to be able to travel and to move around. So what can I do that doesn't affect the people in a negative way, that I visit or that I meet along my journeys?
I do know there's a lot you could say, so much you could say to critique digital nomads and their lifestyles and say, this is like the least sustainable thing you could be doing right now. But I will say, because digital nomads are, or they feel more limited with what they can buy, because often they're just traveling with one or two suitcases. They're not going to be purchasing as much on Amazon or certain things. I know I am speaking for myself. If I was still living in America, I would have I would have probably been ordering something every day and I would have a lot more places to store it. So that would lead me to do that, at least psychologically. So I do think I take care of my things better and I'm keeping better track of them as a digital nomad. And yeah, trying just by lack of space to use less.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point, actually, being a bit more minimal. I think digital nomads are definitely um, way more minimal because you don't have the choice. Like you don't want to carry around more than a backpack or more than a suitcase. Um, so in a way, it's probably actually a bit more sustainable than maybe the average person who, like you say, can just order things from Amazon and has space maybe to put them. Um, I think it also makes you, I think being a bit more minimal makes you think about things you actually need opposed to things that you want. And I'm assuming, well, for me, I travel because I want experiences and I don't want things. And I think a lot of digital nomads probably relate to that, that their money is going into experiences rather than buying items, which probably doesn't relate to the average person.
Yeah, I think too, if you have the time, if you are traveling or you are working remotely and traveling, now that we're bringing this up, it's like the next time you travel or you take a trip, like look at the companies that you're maybe booking for tours and see if they've got a policy for sustainability. Try to choose the one that feels best for you rather than just the first one that pops up in the Google search.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of companies out there that are really trying to advocate um, sustainable travel in terms of like booking local tours. If you're in a city, go eat at the local restaurant. Don't go to the McDonald's. Try and support the people there. It's probably going to be better food anyway and fresher. And yeah, there's definitely, I mean, the company that I work for, Explorio, offers you can book tours and accommodation through them, and they have like carbon offset ratings. They also try to only advertise things that are working with local people that will have a direct benefit on them or the environment around them, um, which I think yeah, is really good.
Yeah, travel is still built into so many industries, and the tourism industry still funds so many people's lives. So I know things are going to be changing. They're going to keep changing over time as we try to find the best way to save our planet, but also keep humanity going. So I think we're going to have to be ever more vigilant about how we use our things that we're traveling with and really focus more on sustainability.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the thing, like, at the end of the day, there's so many things that have a negative impact for the world and the environment, and there's some things we can't avoid. There's some things that are unfortunately out of our hands to make decisions or to make change, but just even within yourself or for yourself, these small things that you can do will will make a difference over time. And if everyone, they always say, if everyone does a tiny bit, then it will have a bigger impact. So I think it's just sometimes off-putting when you think that you're doing something so minuscule in such a big world. Maybe you think it doesn't have an impact, but I think it really does. And it's good to see a lot of tourism and travel companies trying to embrace that and give more options for people. So when you do book, we're heading to Kyrgyzstan in 2 months, and I booked the hostel for our group. There was an option to offset our emissions by planting trees. So there's definitely these options which are coming about, which is making it a bit easier for people who are traveling to be able to make that decision.
Yes, and search for those companies because, like I said, they're not going to come up very likely not to show up first in the search. So do a bit of digging, and you will be going that much further to help the planet and be more sustainable. So, Becca, I want to thank you so much for coming back onto the show and talking with us about this really important travel topic. Is there anything else that you would like to share before we go?
Um, I think that's it. I don't know. I guess just, yeah, next time you're out and about or you're traveling, have a think about what you can do to help make a difference, even if it's something so tiny. Um, just think a bit more about what your impact could be and how you could have a positive impact on someone by booking a local tour or a sustainable tour, or how you could help protect an environment by not contributing to single use. Um, yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to have you on, Becca. And we'll also put our link to the article that we wrote on for Digital Nomad World, so you can get even more ideas. So, Becca, if people want to follow you, where can they go?
The best place probably is Instagram. I can give you the link to put in. It's just Becca Marsh. And then from there you can use my link tree and follow various projects that I'm a part of, and see upcoming trips that I have.
Yeah, you are definitely an ambassador of overland travel and not taking all the flights. You take the long road, and it is really interesting.
Yeah, and it's fun. And I think you kind of learn to love the journey. It's not always about going from A to B, it's about what's in between.
Absolutely. Remember that, everybody, when you think about traveling more sustainably. Have a great day, Becca.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.